You fill a glass of water at the sink this morning. You don't think about it. You never think about it. It's just water, the most boring, unlimited thing in your entire life. You'll drink from a fountain later, run the shower without a second thought, maybe not even finish half the bottle you carry around all day. Now imagine you fill that same glass tomorrow morning and nothing comes out. Not just your tap, every river, every lake, reservoir, and bottle on every store shelf gone in the space of 24 hours. No warning, no explanation, just an empty world where water used to be. Sounds impossible. But let's actually walk through what would happen to you, hour by hour, because the timeline is far faster and far more brutal than most people expect. Your body is roughly 60% water, and it's already losing some of that right now through breathing, sweat, and simply existing. Physician and dehydration researcher Robert Kennefick, who has spent years studying how the human body responds to fluid loss, notes that even a 2% drop in your body's water content is enough to measurably impair concentration, coordination, and mood. That's not day 3 of no water. That's roughly hour 6 to 8 for an average adult, depending on activity and climate. Kennefick's research on military and athletic populations has shown just how quickly performance degrades once that threshold is crossed. Reaction time slows. Decision-making gets noticeably worse, the kind of subtle cognitive fog most people would blame on being tired or stressed, never realizing it's actually their body quietly rationing water away from less essential functions to protect the organs that matter most. So what does that actually feel like? Headache first, then a dry mouth that water alone would normally fix, except there isn't any. Your urine output drops sharply as your kidneys try to conserve every drop they can. You'd feel tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, because your blood is quite literally getting thicker as your body pulls water out of nearly every tissue it can reach to protect your heart and brain. Here's where people usually assume the real crisis begins. But it's not you personally who runs out of time first. It's everything you depend on that also depends on water, all at once. This is the part that separates a genuinely well-informed answer from the version most people imagine, the one where the story is just about how many hours a human can survive without drinking anything. That number matters, but it's almost beside the point. Because long before individual thirst becomes the deciding factor for most of the population, the systems surrounding everyone would already be failing in ways that make survival dramatically harder, regardless of how much water any one person personally needs. Hospitals are among the very first institutions to fail, and not for the reason you'd expect. Sterilization equipment, dialysis machines, and basic hygiene protocols all require constant water access. Public health researchers who study hospital infrastructure vulnerability have pointed out that most hospitals carry only limited backup water reserves, typically enough for a day or two of reduced operations, not indefinite operation. Surgeries requiring sterile equipment would need to stop almost immediately. Dialysis patients, who need clean water-based fluid exchange multiple times a week just to survive, would be in acute danger within that same first day. Intensive care units present an even starker picture. Cooling systems for certain medical equipment, medication preparation, and even basic staff hygiene between patients all depend on a water supply nobody in that building has ever had to consciously manage. Hospital emergency planners typically model their disaster preparedness around scenarios lasting hours to a few days, not a total permanent loss. There simply isn't a version of the plan built for water that never comes back. Meanwhile, something even less visible is already collapsing. There's also a psychological layer to this that researchers studying disaster response have documented across countless real emergencies, even ones far less total than a complete water disappearance. Once people realize a basic survival resource is genuinely running out and won't be resupplied on any predictable timeline, behavior shifts fast. Panic buying of remaining bottled stock would likely happen within the first hours, not days, driven by the same instinct that empties store shelves before hurricanes and snowstorms, except this time, there would be nothing left to restock, because the entire supply chain producing bottled water depends on the same water that's already gone. Sanitation. Every toilet flush, every sewage treatment plant, every method your city uses to move waste away from where people live depends on flowing water. Environmental engineer Dara Entakabi, whose research focuses on water systems and infrastructure resilience, has explained that modern sanitation isn't really about the toilet itself. It's about the enormous invisible plumbing network built entirely around the assumption that water will always be there to carry waste away. Remove that water, and waste simply stops moving. Within days, that creates the exact conditions historically responsible for disease outbreaks like cholera and typhoid, diseases that killed at a massive scale for most of human history specifically because clean water wasn't reliably available. It's worth remembering that this isn't a hypothetical risk humanity has never faced before. Before modern water infrastructure existed, dense cities without reliable clean water and sanitation regularly experienced exactly this kind of outbreak, sometimes killing a meaningful percentage of a city's population within weeks. The only reason that history feels distant now is that running water made it distant. Take the water away, and you're not inventing a new danger. You're simply removing the one thing that had been holding an old, well-documented danger back, letting it return at the same speed and scale it always operated at, before anyone alive today had a reason to think about it. So here's the twist most people never consider when they imagine no water as the disaster. The thirst isn't actually what would kill the most people first. It's what water was quietly doing in the background that everyone forgot to notice. Food production depends on water in ways so total that most people never separate the two ideas. Agricultural scientists studying irrigation dependency have found that roughly 70% of global freshwater use goes toward agriculture, not drinking water at all. Crops in the ground would begin failing within days. Livestock, which require enormous daily water intake to survive, would start dying even faster than the crops around them. The food supply chain you rely on wouldn't collapse next month. It would begin visibly breaking within the very same week the water disappeared. Grocery store shelves would look deceptively normal on day one, since most of what's already stocked doesn't need water to simply sit there. But food processing plants, which use enormous volumes of water for cleaning, cooling, and preparing everything from packaged meat to canned vegetables, would grind to a halt almost immediately. The gap between food currently on shelves and food that can still be produced would widen every single day, with nothing behind it to refill that gap once it emptied out. Electricity itself depends on the same missing resource in a way most people never connect. Most power plants, including coal, gas, and nuclear facilities, rely on enormous volumes of water for cooling their systems. Energy researchers studying power grid vulnerabilities have noted that without adequate cooling water, many plants are required to reduce output or shut down entirely to avoid dangerous overheating. So the lights you're relying on to even read a headline about the water crisis would likely start flickering out on their own timeline, stacking a power failure directly on top of everything else already unraveling. Then there's the part almost nobody thinks about until it's already too late. Fire. Firefighting depends entirely on water pressure moving through hydrant systems connected to the same reservoirs and treatment plants that just went dry. Fire behavior researchers have documented how quickly urban fires can spread once suppression capability disappears, since a single unchecked structure fire in a dense city can jump block to block within hours. Remove the ability to fight fires at all, and even a small accidental spark becomes a city-scale threat with no real way to stop it. Firefighters themselves would essentially become bystanders, trained and equipped, but with nothing left to actually fight fire with. Trucks would still respond, crews would still arrive, but without pressurized water reaching those hydrants, the entire profession's core tool would simply be gone, leaving whole neighborhoods to burn in a way modern cities haven't experienced in generations. Back when this exact vulnerability, fire with no way to stop it, helped define why cities eventually built the water infrastructure you rely on today in the first place. Why does any of this matter to you, standing at a sink that works completely normally right now? Because it reveals just how many separate, fragile systems are quietly stacked on top of one single resource you've never had to think twice about. Your hospital, your sewage system, your food supply, your city's ability to survive its own accidents. All of it resting on a resource so unremarkable that an entire day without it sounds almost boring to imagine, right up until you actually trace out what stops working, in order, hour by hour. Water scarcity researchers who study regions already experiencing real water insecurity, places where taps genuinely do run dry for days or weeks at a time, consistently describe the same pattern. It's never just thirst that defines the crisis. It's the cascading failure of everything water was silently making possible. That distinction matters more than it might seem. Thirst is a problem you can picture, a feeling you've actually experienced in a mild form and know how to solve. The cascading failure underneath it, hospitals losing sterilization, food supply chains breaking mid-week, fire departments left with nothing to fight fire with, is much harder to imagine precisely because none of it has ever happened to you personally. It's the invisible infrastructure failing quietly in the background while everyone's attention stays fixed on the more obvious, more immediate problem of an empty glass. You fill a glass of water at the sink tomorrow morning. It comes out exactly the way it always does, the way you've never once had to question. Except now you understand that boring is doing an enormous amount of invisible work, holding up hospitals, food supplies, sewage systems, and entire cities, one unremarkable glass at a time.